What if I told you that one of the greatest civilizations in human history was destroyed, invaded, and nearly erased again and again? Empires burned it, armies crushed it, and entire cities vanished into dust. And yet, this same land once ruled the world. Under Cyrus the Great, it created the first declaration of human rights long before the modern world even existed. Then came Alexander the Great, then the Mongols, then endless waves of conquest, each believing they would finish what the last began. But they all failed, because while others destroyed, Persia rebuilt. While the world lived in darkness, its scholars mapped the stars, advanced medicine, and shaped human knowledge. Then came the modern era, oil, power, and politics, reshaping the nation from the shadows. And still, its people rise. From ancient kings to voices in the streets, this is not just history, this is survival. A civilization 7,000 years in the making, broken, rebuilt, and unbroken. This is Iran.
You're watching Echoed Reality. Let's uncover the past. Today, right now, we are going to travel through 7,000 years of human civilization. We are going to witness the birth of the world's first superpower. We are going to stand in the throne room of Cyrus the Great, the king who freed the slaves of Babylon and wrote history's first human rights charter 2,500 years before the United Nations existed. We are going to feel the ground shake as Alexander the Great's army marches east. We are going to smell the smoke as the Mongols reduce entire cities to ash. We are going to sit in the oil fields of Iran in 1953 and watch a democratically elected leader get overthrown by the CIA, and then understand exactly why that one moment still echoes in every headline about Iran today. And we are going to meet the people, not just the kings and the conquerors, the poets, the scholars, the women who cut their hair in the streets, the soldiers who marched into poison gas because their country asked them to, the ordinary Iranians, brilliant, warm, complex, who have been living inside of history's most dramatic stories for their entire lives. This is not a dry history lecture. This is a story, the greatest story you've never been told in full. From the very first tribes on the Iranian plateau to the nuclear negotiations of yesterday, we are covering it all. Every empire, every invasion, every revolution, every resurrection. So settle in, get comfortable, because this is going to be a long journey. And I promise you, every single minute is worth it. This is the entire history of Iran. Geography is destiny, and nowhere is this truer than in Iran. Imagine a fortress built by nature. To the west, the Zagros Mountains, a wall of stone protecting the plateau from the Mesopotamian plains. To the north, the Alborz Mountains and the Caspian Sea. In the center, vast, unforgiving salt deserts. This land breeds toughness. It demands resilience. Long before the Persians arrived, this land was home. In the southwest, bordering the great civilizations of Sumer and Babylon, lay Elam. The Elamites were not Persians. They spoke a language isolate, unrelated to anything else. But for 2,000 years, they built ziggurats like the massive Choka Zanbil, which still stands today, a mountain of brick rising from the desert floor. Further east, the mysterious Giraft civilization thrived, trading with the Indus Valley. But the ancestors of the people we know today were still on the move. Around 1500 BC, Aryan tribes, a branch of the Indo-Europeans, migrated south from the steppes of Central Asia. They called themselves the Arya, meaning the noble ones. The land became Iranian Vayasia, the land of the Aryans, Iran. They split into two main groups. The Persians went south to Fars. The Medes settled in the northwest. For centuries, they were the underdogs living in the shadow of the terrifying Assyrian Empire to the west. The Assyrians were the brutal masters of the ancient world, known for skinning their enemies alive and piling skulls at city gates. But the Medes were learning. They were uniting. In 612 BC, under King Cyrus, the Medes did the unthinkable. They joined forces with the Babylonians and stormed Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. The city of blood fell. The Medes had become the first Iranian empire, but they were merely the prelude. The true storm was gathering in the south, in a small vassal kingdom called Anshan. History is often written by the victors, and usually those victors are tyrants. But once in a millennium, a figure emerges who changes the definition of power itself. His name was Cyrus. Born around 600 BC, Cyrus was a Persian king, a vassal to his grandfather, the Median emperor Astyages. The legends say Astyages had a dream that a vine grew from his daughter's womb and covered the whole of Asia. Fearing his grandson would overthrow him, he ordered the baby killed. But like Moses or Romulus, the baby was saved. In 550 BC, Cyrus rebelled, but this wasn't just a war, it was a changing of the guard. When he marched on the Median capital of Ecbatana, the Median troops didn't fight him, they defected. They handed the emperor over to Cyrus. And here, Cyrus did something strange for the ancient world. He didn't kill his grandfather. He didn't sack the city. He united the Medes and Persians into a single dual monarchy. He forged a partnership. Cyrus then turned west. He conquered Lydia, home of the fabulously wealthy King Croesus, inventing cavalry tactics on the fly to defeat the Lydian lancers. Then he turned his eyes toward the greatest prize of all, Babylon. In 539 BC, Babylon was the center of the world. Its walls were impregnable. But Cyrus was clever. His engineers diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed beneath the city walls. The water level dropped, and his soldiers waded in under the cover of night. They took the city without a battle. The Bible tells us that the Babylonian king saw handwriting on the wall that night. His time was up. Upon entering Babylon, Cyrus did not burn it. He did not enslave the population. He issued a decree inscribed on a clay barrel, now known as the Cyrus cylinder. He declared that all peoples could worship their own gods. He freed the enslaved populations, including the Jews who had been held captive in Babylon for generations. He gave them funds to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. To the Jews, he was a Messiah, the only non-Jew in the Bible to be given that title. To the Greeks, he was the ideal ruler. Cyrus the Great had built the Achaemenid Empire, the first superpower, not just on blood, but on tolerance. He died in battle in 530 BC, buried in a simple tomb in Pasargadae. The inscription simply read, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not grudge me this piece of stone that covers my body." Under Cyrus's successors, the empire went from great to incomprehensible. His son Cambyses conquered Egypt, adding the pharaoh's wealth to Persia. But it was Darius the Great, a distant relative who seized the throne in 522 BC, who turned this conquest into a functioning machine. Darius was a genius administrator. He divided the empire into satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap who was monitored by the king's eyes and ears, imperial inspectors. He built the Royal Road, a highway stretching 1,600 miles from Susa to Sardis. Couriers on fresh horses could cover the distance in a week. As Herodotus wrote, "Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds," a motto the U.S. Postal Service would borrow thousands of years later. He built Persepolis, Parsa, the city of the Persians. It was not a political capital, but a spiritual one, a place for the New Year festival, Nowruz. The reliefs on the walls show us something unique: no scenes of war, no slaves being whipped. Instead, we see representatives of 23 nations holding hands, bringing gifts, walking in peace. But the West remembers the Achaemenids for a different reason: the Greco-Persian Wars. In 499 BC, Greek cities in Ionia rebelled against Persian rule, supported by Athens. Darius vowed to punish Athens. In 490 BC, his forces landed at Marathon. Against the odds, the Athenians won. It was a minor nuisance to the emperor, but a legendary victory for the Greeks. 10 years later, Darius's son Xerxes returned with the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. He bridged the Hellespont with boats. He marched into Greece. We all know the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae holding the pass to the last man. But despite that heroism, Xerxes burned Athens to the ground. However, the Persian navy was lured into a trap at Salamis and destroyed. Xerxes retreated. The war ended not with the destruction of Persia, but with a boundary drawn. Persia remained the master of Asia, but the seeds of decline were sown. Court intrigues, assassinations, and rising taxes weakened the central authority. The Achaemenid eagle was tired, and to the west, a young lion was waking up. In 334 BC, Alexander of Macedon crossed into Asia. He was 20 years old. He was obsessed with the Iliad, and he viewed himself as the new Achilles. His target was King Darius III and the entirety of the Persian Empire. The Persian satraps underestimated him initially, but Alexander won battle after battle. Granicus, Issus, he moved with terrifying speed. In 331 BC, the final showdown happened at Gaugamela. The Persians had 250,000 men, war elephants, and scythed chariots. Alexander had 47,000. But Alexander charged directly at Darius III, shattering the Persian nerve. Darius fled. The empire had fallen. Alexander marched into Persepolis. The soldiers who gazed upon it were stunned by its beauty and wealth. They feasted for weeks. And then, fire. Whether it was a drunken accident or deliberate revenge for the burning of Athens, Persepolis was consumed by flames. The library, the archives, the art, gone. To the Iranians, Alexander is not the Great. He is Alexander the Accursed. Yet Alexander was seduced by the culture he conquered. He began wearing Persian robes. He married a Persian princess, Roxana. He encouraged his generals to marry Persian women. He wanted a fusion of East and West, but he died young, at 32, in Babylon. His empire fractured. The Seleucids, a Greek dynasty, took over Iran. For nearly 2 centuries, Greek art, gods, and language dominated the cities. But in the countryside, the sacred fires of Zoroastrianism still burned. The Iranians were waiting. They came from the northeast, the Parni tribe, nomads, excellent horsemen. In 247 BC, under their leader, Arsaces, they began to chip away at the Greek Seleucids. They were the Parthians. The Parthians were different. They were decentralized, a feudal confederation of noble houses. They weren't great builders of stone like the Achaemenids, but they were masters of war. By 129 BC, they had kicked the Greeks out of Iran, but they found a new enemy on their western border, Rome. Rome was unstoppable, or so they thought. In 53 BC, the Roman triumvirate Crassus, the richest man in Rome, invaded Parthia seeking glory. He marched 40,000 legions into the flat desert near Carrhae. The Parthian general Surena met him with 10,000 horse archers. It was a slaughter. The Parthians used camels to resupply their archers with endless arrows. They would feign retreat, lure the Romans out, and then turn in their saddles to fire backward, the famous Parthian shot. Crassus was killed. Legend says molten gold was poured down his throat to mock his greed. Rome never conquered Parthia. For 400 years, the Parthians held the line, mixing Greek and Persian culture, keeping the Silk Road open. But internal civil wars eventually bled them dry. In 224 AD, a vassal king from Fars, the heartland of the old Achaemenids, rose up. His name was Ardashir. The Sasanians were not content with just ruling. They wanted to restore the glory of the Achaemenids. They were centralized, aggressive, and fiercely religious. They established Zoroastrianism as the state religion, organizing the priesthood and codifying the Avesta, the holy book. If the Parthians were Rome's headache, the Sasanians were Rome's nightmare. King Shapur I didn't just defeat Romans, he captured the Emperor Valerian alive in 260 AD. He used the Roman emperor as a footstool to mount his horse. It was a humiliation the West never forgot. The Sasanian era was a golden age of culture. Under Khosrow I, known as the Immortal Soul, the empire reached its zenith. He reformed the tax system, supported the sciences, and welcomed Greek philosophers fleeing a Christianized Rome. It was from India that the game of chaturanga came to the Sasanian court, where it was refined into chaturang, what we know as chess. Their architecture, massive iwans, great domes, would become the blueprint for Islamic architecture later. Sasanian silver plates and silk textiles were traded from China to France. But the empire was exhausted. Centuries of brutal warfare with the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Rome, had drained the treasury and the population. By the early 7th century, both empires were battered boxers, struggling to stand. They didn't notice the storm brewing in the deserts to the south. In 633 AD, the Arab-Muslim armies burst out of the Arabian Peninsula. They were fueled by a new faith, Islam, and united for the first time in history. They hit the exhausted Sasanian Empire with the force of a tidal wave. The Persians looked down on the Arabs as simple desert nomads. They were wrong. At the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636 AD, the Sasanian army was devastated. The Arab general Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas defeated the glorious Persian heavy cavalry. The Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon, fell. The last king, Yazdegerd III, fled east, eventually murdered by a miller for his jewelry. The ancient fire temples were doused. The Sasanian Empire was no more. For Iran, this was a trauma. It is often called the 2 centuries of silence. The Zoroastrian religion was marginalized. The cities were occupied. But the conversion wasn't instant, and it wasn't entirely forced. Many converted to avoid the jizya tax. Others found appeal in the egalitarian message of Islam compared to the strict caste system of the Sasanians. But here lies the miracle of Iran. In Egypt, Syria, and North Africa, the local populations were Arabized. They adopted the Arabic language and forgot their old identities. Iran did not. Iran accepted Islam, but it rejected becoming Arab. They kept their language, Persian. They kept their Nowruz. They swallowed the conqueror and changed him from within. As the saying goes, Islam conquered Persia, but Persia conquered Islam. By the 8th century, the center of the Islamic world shifted to Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate. And who built Baghdad? Who ran the administration? Persians. The Barmakid family, Persian viziers, practically ran the empire. This was the Islamic Golden Age, and it was deeply Persian in character. In the House of Wisdom, scholars translated Greek and Indian texts. Al-Khawarizmi, a Persian mathematician, developed algebra from the word al-jabr. Ibn Sina, arguably the greatest mind of the era, wrote the Canon of Medicine, which was the standard medical textbook in Europe for 600 years. But the greatest revival was in language. In the 9th century, a poet named Ferdowsi feared that the legendary history of Persia was being forgotten. He spent 30 years writing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. 50,000 couplets. It told the story of mythical kings, of the hero Rostam, of the tragic battles of father and son. It single-handedly saved the Persian language from extinction. Today, every Iranian, regardless of education, knows verses from the Shahnameh. This era gave us the giants of poetry, Omar Khayyam and his Rubaiyat, Sadi, and later Rumi and Hafez. They turned Persian into the language of high culture, of love, and of mysticism. From Istanbul to Delhi, if you were a cultured person, you read Persian. Enjoying this journey through history? Join our community. Subscribe to Echoed Reality, like this video, and comment below which ancient empire fascinates you the most.
As the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad weakened, local Persian dynasties began to assert independence. It started in the east, in Khorasan. The Tahirids, the Saffarids, founded by a coppersmith, and the Samanids. The Samanids were crucial. They revived pre-Islamic Persian court traditions while remaining Sunni Muslims. Then came the Buyids, rough tribesmen from the Caspian coast. They were Shia. In a shocking turn of events, they marched on Baghdad and made the caliph their puppet. For a century, Persian rulers controlled the Arab caliph. But stability was rare. The Turks began migrating in from Central Asia, first as slave soldiers, then as conquerors. The Ghaznavids and later the Seljuks took over. But even these Turkish sultans became Persianized. They patronized Persian art and appointed Persian viziers like the brilliant Nizam al-Mulk. Iran was a cultural melting pot, bubbling with art, science, and theology. But the heat was about to turn up, way up. In 1219, the Shah of the Khwarezmian Empire, which ruled Iran, made the worst diplomatic mistake in history. Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to his lands. The local governor killed the merchants and stole their goods. Genghis sent ambassadors to demand justice. The Shah shaved their beards and sent their heads back. Genghis Khan did not just declare war, he declared an apocalypse. The Mongols swept into Iran. They didn't just conquer, they obliterated. Nishapur, a city of great learning, was leveled. Every cat and dog was killed. Merv, Ray, Bukhara, burned. The irrigation systems, the qanats that had supported life in the desert for millennia, were destroyed. Estimates suggest that the population of the Iranian plateau dropped from 2.5 million to 250,000. It was a demographic collapse that took centuries to recover from. The light of civilization nearly went out. And yet, the echo continued. The Mongols, specifically the Ilkhanate dynasty, established by Genghis's grandson Hulagu, eventually settled down. They looked around at the ruins and the remaining Persian bureaucrats. They converted to Islam. They became patrons of the arts. They built the massive dome of Sultaniya. Once again, the conqueror was conquered by the culture. But just as recovery began, Timur, Tamerlane, arrived in the 14th century, building new towers of skulls. It seemed Iran was destined for eternal chaos. It needed a unifying force. It needed a new identity. In 1501, a 15-year-old boy named Ismail marched into Tabriz. He was the leader of a militant Sufi order called the Safavids. He crowned himself Shah, and he made a decree that changed the Middle East forever. Iran would be a Shia state. Until this moment, Iran had been largely Sunni. Ismail enforced Shiism with the sword. This gave Iran a distinct national identity, separating it from the Sunni Ottoman Empire to the west and the Sunni Mughals to the east. It created a fortress of faith.
The rivalry with the Ottomans was fierce. At the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, the Ottoman cannons decimated the Safavid cavalry, who considered firearms unmanly. Iran learned the hard way: modernize or die. The Safavids reached their peak under Shah Abbas the Great in the early 1600s. He moved the capital to Isfahan. He rebuilt the army with British help, the Shirley brothers. He created a city so beautiful that travelers called it Isfahan Nesf-de-Jahan. Isfahan is half the world. The Imam Square, the Sheikh Lotfallah Mosque, the Ali Kapu Palace, these are masterpieces of human architecture. It was a time of silk trade, wealth, and stability. A unified Iran had returned. But dynasties wrought. The Safavids fell to Afghan invaders in 1722. After a brief, chaotic brilliance under the military genius Nadir Shah, who sacked Delhi, and the benevolent Zand dynasty, the Qajars took power in 1789. The Qajar era is a tragedy of lost potential. The world was industrializing, but Iran was stuck in medieval feudalism. To the north, the Russian bear was hungry. In two disastrous wars, Iran lost its Caucasian territories, modern-day Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, to Russia. The treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchai are still remembered in Iran as moments of supreme national humiliation. To the south, the British Empire wanted to protect India. Iran became a buffer state in the Great Game. The Qajar kings, desperate for cash to fund their lavish trips to Europe, began selling the country piece by piece. They gave concessions for tobacco, telegraphs, and customs to foreigners. In 1891, the tobacco protest showed the first spark of people power. The clerics banned tobacco, and the Shah was forced to cancel the British concession. The people were waking up. By 1905, the Iranians had had enough. Inflation was high, the Shah was corrupt, and foreigners ran the economy. An unlikely alliance formed: the intellectual secularists influenced by the West, the Bazari merchants, and the Shia clergy. They demanded a house of justice. They demanded a constitution. In 1906, the dying Mozaffar ad-Din Shah signed the first constitution in the Middle East. It established a parliament, the Majlis. It was a miraculous moment. But it was short-lived. The new Shah, Muhammad Ali, backed by Russian Cossacks, bombed the parliament. Civil war erupted. And then a discovery changed everything. In 1908, in the southwest, British geologists struck black gold, oil. Suddenly, Iran wasn't just a buffer state, it was a prize. Britain bought the rights to Iran's oil for pennies. The constitutional revolution was strangled in the crib by foreign intervention and internal chaos. Iran was a failed state, ravaged by famine and bandits. It needed a strong man. Out of the chaos of post-World War I Iran emerged Reza Khan, an illiterate but brilliant commander of the Cossack Brigade. In 1921, he marched on Tehran. By 1925, he had deposed the last Qajar king and crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. Reza Shah was Iran's Ataturk. He was a brutal modernizer. He looked at the clerics and the tribes and saw obstacles. He built the Trans-Iranian Railway. He built Tehran University. He changed the country's international name from Persia to Iran. He banned the veil, chador, by force. Police would rip them off women in the streets. He wanted a secular, industrial, powerful Iran. But he was also a dictator who stole massive amounts of land. When World War II broke out, he declared neutrality, but the Allies feared his ties to Germany. In 1941, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran in a surprise attack to secure the oil and the supply lines to Russia. They forced Reza Shah to abdicate and die in exile. They placed his young, inexperienced son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, on the throne. History is heating up. Before we enter the modern era, make sure you're subscribed to Echoed Reality. Click the bell icon so you never miss a documentary like this. In the early 1950s, a new hero emerged. Not a king, but a democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. He looked at the Anglo-Iranian oil company, now BP, which was taking the vast majority of profits from Iranian oil, and said, "Enough." In 1951, he nationalized the oil industry. The British were furious. They blockaded Iran's economy, but Mossadegh stood firm. The British turned to the Americans, warning that Mossadegh might pivot to the Soviet Union. It was the height of the Cold War. The CIA listened. In August 1953, the CIA, under Kermit Roosevelt, and MI6 launched Operation Ajax. They hired thugs to create chaos in Tehran. They bribed army officers. Mossadegh was overthrown and placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. The Shah, who had fled to Rome, returned in triumph, but his throne now rested on American bayonets. The democratic dream was dead. The seeds of anti-Americanism were planted deep in the Iranian psyche. The next 25 years were a golden cage. The Shah launched the White Revolution, land reform, women's suffrage, literacy corps. Oil prices skyrocketed in the 70s, and money flooded in. Iran became a regional military power. The Shah dreamed of a great civilization, but beneath the glitter there was rot. The Savak, the secret police, tortured dissidents. The gap between rich and poor exploded. The culture was becoming westernized so fast that many Iranians felt they were losing their souls. They called it Westoxification, or Garb Zadegi. One voice rose above the rest. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, an austere cleric exiled to Iraq and then France. He recorded sermons on cassette tapes that were smuggled into Iran. He called the Shah a wretched man and a puppet of the West. He united the leftists, the liberals, and the religious poor. By 1978, the streets were full. Death to the Shah echoed from millions of throats. The king had lost his people. It was one of the most significant events of the 20th century. A monarchy that traced its roots back 2,500 years vanished overnight. In its place, the Islamic Republic, a theocracy led by the supreme leader. The revolution wasn't just internal. In November 1979, radical students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. They demanded the U.S. return the dying Shah to stand trial. The relationship between Iran and the West was shattered permanently. Inside Iran, the coalition cracked. The Islamists purged the leftists and liberals who had helped them overthrow the Shah. Executions followed. The veil became mandatory again. But just as the new republic was finding its footing, a predator smelled blood. In September 1980, Saddam Hussein of Iraq invaded Iran, hoping to seize the oil-rich province of Khuzestan while Iran was in chaos. He expected a 3-day war. He got an 8-year nightmare. The world, the US, Soviet Union, Europe, and Arab states backed Saddam. Iran stood alone, but they fought with the ferocity of the possessed. Human waves of volunteers, Basij, some armed only with faith, charged into machine gun fire. Saddam used chemical weapons, mustard gas, nerve agents against soldiers and civilians. The war ended in 1988 with a stalemate. No borders changed, but 1 million people died. It cemented the narrative of the Islamic Republic. We are alone against the world. We can only rely on ourselves. This trauma is the key to understanding modern Iran's military strategy today. Khomeini died in 1989. Ali Khamenei took his place. The country needed to rebuild. Presidents came and went. The pragmatic Rafsanjani, the reformist Khatami, who smiled at the West and spoke of a dialogue of civilizations, but the hardliners held the real power. A new generation was born, the children of the revolution. They wanted jobs, freedom, and engagement with the world. In 2009, after the disputed election of hardliner Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, millions marched in the Green Movement asking, "Where is my vote?" They were crushed. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Iran was building a nuclear program. To the West, it was a threat to existence. To the regime, it was the ultimate insurance policy against being invaded like Iraq or Afghanistan. 2015 brought a glimmer of hope. The nuclear deal, JCPOA, was signed. Sanctions were lifted. Iranians danced in the streets. But in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the deal. Maximum pressure sanctions crushed the Iranian economy. Inflation soared. The currency collapsed. Tensions boiled over. In 2020, the U.S. assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top general, bringing the two nations to the brink of war. But the real explosion was internal. In September 2022, a young woman named Mahsa Amini died in the custody of the morality police. Her death sparked the Woman, Life, Freedom movement. Gen Z Iranians, fearless and furious, took to the streets, challenging the very foundations of the Islamic Republic. Today, Iran stands at a crossroads, a regime with deep roots but waning legitimacy, a population that is highly educated, pro-modern, yet strangled by sanctions and repression, a regional superpower involved in conflicts from Syria to Yemen. The story isn't over. If you learned something new today, please like and share this documentary. It helps us create more in-depth history content. Comment below. What do you think the future holds for Iran?
So, what is Iran? It is not just a country on a map, it is a story of endurance. From the clay tablets of Elam to the poetry of Rumi, from the tolerance of Cyrus to the fires of the revolution. Iran is a civilization that has been beaten, burned, and buried 1,000 times. Yet, like the mythical phoenix, the Simorgh, it always rises. It is a land of contradictions, a place where ancient traditions coexist with modern defiance, where the people are known for their legendary hospitality, even while their government stands in isolation. To understand our human story, we must look at this plateau, because Iran holds a mirror to us all, showing us the heights of our creativity and the depths of our cruelty. Governments come and go, kings die, ideologies fade, empires may fall, but some civilizations echo forever. Thank you for watching Echoed Reality.